Hockey is a really annoying sport, man, and I think I'm starting to get tired of seeing Vegas beat the Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. Thank you so much for sitting with us and, of course, continuing to support us. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Now, wow. I'm getting real tired of this Jets team losing to Vegas. I'm getting tired of them losing to quality playoff teams. I'm getting tired of them giving, ammo and fuel to the people who call this team frauds, because we all know that the Jets aren't really frauds, but they've definitely got some really big problems. And, for all of the good stuff that the Jets did do against Vegas, unfortunately, it just doesn't matter, right? Winnipeg still lost 4-1. They still struggled to score. They still struggled on the power play in ways you can't even begin to imagine. And at the end of the day, you're talking about a Vegas squad that's in the second wildcard spot for a reason. They're mediocre. They're not that good. Compared to previous years where Vegas was at the top of the NHL, look, this Knights team is still talented, and there's no mistaking that. But the Jets really have to prove that they can beat teams like this, because guess what? They're going to face much better teams in the playoffs. There's a good chance that if the Jets somehow stay within the Central Division in the top 3 seed, or even slip to the first wild card, they're going to get one of these Central Division teams unless Vancouver ends up, taking first in the West and the Jets slip to wild card 1. But I got to say, at the end of the day, the Jets are going to face a team that's probably going to be one of the top leaders in the league. And with how Winnipeg has played recently, do you think they have a hope in heck of actually pulling that off? Right now, it just doesn't feel like it. Even when the Jets play well, they lose. When they play poorly, they lose. It just doesn't feel like there's a middle ground here, and it's very frustrating. And I know some of it's just poor luck. Some of it's great goaltending. We'll talk about some takeaways from this night's game and stuff, but man, the frustration, not only for the players and for the fans, has to be building to an all-time crescendo. It's getting bad, folks, and I think with only 9 games left in the season, things feel pretty grim. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty of this loss to the Knights, though, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more, because right now new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, like I said, I'm trying not to rant and complain, but like the way that the Jets played tonight, it was positive in a lot of ways. And I think if you look at it from a holistic standpoint, right, a really high-level perspective, you could say that there were steps forward, and that is a good sign. But at the end of the day, right, we're talking about a team that's 9 games from the playoffs. 9 games. The playoffs start on April 20th. The Jets have zero time to suddenly right this ship and get this team playing good hockey. And I look at how the Jets played in this game, and while they did outplay Vegas at 5v5 and stuff, the same continued problems that are holding this back have again continued to put the Jets behind the 8 ball. For as good as the second, third, and fourth line played, guess who still sucked? The top line. They were almost absent, the entire game. They only created a good couple of chances, and they didn't score. And I know that scoring isn't everything, but when your team desperately needs its superstars to step up and find a way to make something happen, the top line just hasn't been able to. And that's really putting the rest of the team, in a tough spot. And I'm not saying that all of the pressure should be on the top line to really be, the only source of offense. That's absolutely not the case. But it should be at the top of this unit, and it's played so poorly. It's been a continued problem this entire year. Well, not really the entire year. Ever since Kyle Connor came back, that's when it started being a problem again. It was a problem in previous seasons. It's a problem again. And, for as much as we talk about it, it just never seems like it changes. It's one of the few constants in life, other than death and taxes, is Scheifele playing with Connor. And it kills this team every single season. Every season. The only way that you can ever make it work is to put Ehlers up there. And that is the one thing Bones just refuses to commit to. So, at this point, I just give up, right? I really do. I follow up there, Appleton, Nemestikov. They will use every single winger on this team except the one player who can actually make that pair work. And it's insanity. It really is. And look, I'm trying to keep my frustrations at a minimum here, but at the end of the day, this is just some bull crap. I got to be honest. And I think for the Jets to continue to roll and trudge up this hill time and time again, doing the same things over and over again, it's wild. It really is. I just can't believe that we're still talking about this with 9 games left in the season, and we're still looking for moral victories, because that's all this team has been capable of, is moral victories. You take a step forward and you feel a little bit better about yourself, great, but you still lost. You're still on a 5-game losing streak, and you still have proven that at the end of the day, the Jets can play well enough, but in those critical, decisive moments when you need this team to have some kind of a killer instinct, something that makes them look like a true contender, they just haven't had it. And it sucks, because I know that this team, in the right orientation, is probably capable of much better than we've seen. But until the coaching staff sorts its crap out, we're just going to get stuck with this time and time again. And honestly, I start to wonder if the players even believe that they're not good enough to make it past this. I don't know. I can't begin to imagine how frustrating it must be for those guys. You sit in that room and you ask yourself, what could you have done differently? You run through all the situations and decisions that are made. And at the end of the day, you start to realize, or at least maybe have a bit of a thought process, that maybe the coaching staff and leadership is wrong for this team. I don't know. I just feel like, for anything the Jets did right in this game, the biggest problems with the top line and the dog crap power play killed this team. That power play had 5 chances. I don't care that the coaching or the referees screwed up the Nick Hag elbowing that should have been a 5-minute major. It doesn't matter. The Jets had 5 power plays and they got 0 goals. Now, they did create some good shots, and it was better than it's been, but they still got 0 goals. I just don't get it, man. We're already in the final stretch of the season, and this team is still circling the same wagon that it's circled for years. And it sucks, because this year felt, for at least half of it to maybe even 2/3, like it'd be different. But you know what? It just seems like we're back to the same stuff again. And I feel like with where the Jets are at and what they desperately need, somebody is going to have to step up for this team, because it feels like the coaching staff and the leadership aren't there right now. And I don't think it's leadership in the locker room that is lacking. It's got to come from somebody on that bench who's capable of giving this team the directive and the right tools to succeed, because the players are doing about as much as they can out there in the roles that they've been assigned, and they are struggling to pull it all together. So at some point, somebody is going to have to make a hard decision, because this team does not have the luxury and time to have games like this where they play well and they still lose. They've lost too much already. And I think at this point, with the form that they're in, they walk into the playoffs and they can play decent hockey, but they're going to get wiped. I mean, that's just the feeling that I have. They're not getting out of round 1. Unless something really changes in this final stretch of games, especially on these road trips, what are we even talking about with the playoffs, right? An appearance, a deep run? Definitely not a deep run. Not unless something drastically changes. And I don't even know if Velarde coming back is going to be that positive force and the biggest change that we need. I'm trying to be positive. I've tried to be positive throughout the entire year and say that the Jets still have time, but the way that they continue to lose games, even when they play well, it just feels like things just aren't going to go well for Winnipeg, and that they're going wrong at the exact time that you don't want to be struggling. But, well, like I said, there are still 9 games to try and figure something out. We'll talk about how the Jets can make the most of the time that they have left in the regular season, because there is still a chance that they can turn things around, but they have got to figure out some of the stuff before it becomes too late. We'll get to that in just a moment. But before we go any further, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. March Madness is here, and you can say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sports book. And obviously, right now, a lot of you have been following the tournament. Virginia, of course, had a really awful game, but a lot of people said they shouldn't have gotten in. I don't really follow college basketball, so I'm not even going to begin to comment on the rankings and seedings and how this tournament works. College sports in general always confuses me, especially when you get into this playoff stuff. But for a lot of you who avidly follow the sport, this is probably the best chance you'll ever have to get in on the action and try and come away with a big victory. And you can really have a ton of fun because right now, new customers to FanDuel get $200 in bonus bets if their $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, maybe even the tournament winner for March Madness. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon right now and bet on college hoops until they cut down the net. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us back on this episode as we are trying desperately not to get too upset. I know I've ranted a little bit more than I usually do. Probably the angriest episode I've had in a while, and I can't even say that I'm really mad at the players or anything. I think the guys have honestly just laid out about as much of the effort as they can, and it's still coming up short. And at this point, all of my fingers are on the coaching staff. I feel like that is where the problem is right now, and until they get past it, the Jets are stuck in a bit of a rut. And, I can't even hold the players to account because we all can see what the problem is, and I feel like the coaching staff certainly can see the problem, but they just haven't solved it. But before we dive into how the Jets can at least try and salvage the situation before it's too late, just wanted to let you know about something really cool the Locked On Network is doing. If you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you get tired of shouting, you should make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming, like I'm doing right now. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us, though. Like I said, the Jets do at least have 9 games to sort something out, and I don't even know what that means at this point. For all of the steps forward that the team has made in the past couple of games, it's not really amounting to much. They're still finding ways to lose, and one of the biggest problems with this team is that, sure, the 5v5 shooting percentage has kind of dipped, but you usually have at least a decent power play to back it up, and Winnipeg's power play is the furthest thing from decent. Honestly, you might even look at tanking teams and think that their power play is better. That is how bad Winnipeg's power play is. It has found every single way to make one of the most lethal-looking units on paper be basically a paper tiger. It's really embarrassing how bad this power play is, and I can't even begin to imagine a reason for the special team staff to come back next year. I think on both sides of the puck, they've got to make changes to the staff. I never root for people to lose their jobs, but I think it's just a necessity in this case. The Jets have too much at stake, and they have too many performance issues, especially with something that should be an absolute strength for this team, for the coaching staff to remain the same. I even have doubts about, whether Bonus should really be manning the bench next year. But even with, just the assistant staff, you've got to make a change on the special teams units. And I don't even just mean the power play. PK's got to get changed out too, because the PK, it is terrible. I don't know how it's slipped back so much this year, but it's awful. And the power play, the power play's been bad for years, but especially this season, yeah, wow. It's killing this team because, like, in games where the Jets are playing close, even strength margins, they could do with a huge boost from a power play that's even remotely competent. And the Jets' power play is one of the worst I have ever seen. It's just so bad to watch. It's so frustrating. You might as well just turn the game off while the Jets are on the power play because you probably ain't going to miss a thing. Even when they do score, it's so infrequent that it just doesn't really seem to register. It's more surprising that they actually pulled it off, but then you're like, yeah, but we're going to go back to another situation where, this power play is crap because, again, they resort to the same tactics, the same slow puck movement, the same shooting options time and again, and there's just no changing, apparently. I feel like the only time the power play is dangerous is when they're on some sort of a rush counter against the team and they create some chaos where the Jets aren't necessarily in assigned spots and roles. When Winnipeg skaters improvise, they actually look a lot better on the power play. So it's wild that is the players taking over rather than the coaching. I feel like, Velarde should not be the reason that your power play is successful. Having a guy who can be really useful there is fantastic. But having all of your power play completely come to a grinding halt because Velarde goes out with some serious medical issues is crazy. You have all the talent in the world to make this power play look really good. And yet the Jets have found every way to make it look like a bottom of the barrel, league worst special teams unit. So look, man, if you solve this, I think a lot of our angst probably goes away because the power play is one of the biggest problems. But the second thing the Jets have to do is fix that top line. The top line is going to be especially pivotal in the playoffs because guess what? You get fewer power plays in the playoffs. Despite the perception, you actually have less leniency and less wiggle room when it comes to those sorts of penalty calls. You are going to be on a very strict game management regimen with how the refs are going to be, which means the Jets are probably going to have to find some way to make even strength scoring a dominant focus like it was earlier this year. And that's going to have to come down to the top line being a huge part of that. You can't ask the second through fourth lines to carry everything while your top line gets absolutely nuked every single game. And I know that Bones doesn't want to do it, but he has got to split up Connor and Scheifele if he's not going to put Ehlers up there. That duo has to be split apart. I don't care what anyone wants anymore. If you keep that duo together, it is going to kill this team in the playoffs. They have been borderline unplayable for most of the season as a pair, and it's not getting better. Even in the games where they've maybe been break even, it's still not good enough. This team needs that line in particular has to be one of your breadwinners for the team, and it's just not. And those guys, when they're apart, they are such different players. They're much more effective when they're split off and with different partners. So maybe it's time to get a little bit, I don't know, experimental in their relationships and let them play with other people. I mean, I can't begin to imagine a reason why the coaching staff would keep going back to this well that's poisoned. I mean, it's bad. It was bad when Wheeler was here. It's bad when Appleton, Nemestikov, and Iafallo are up there. I mean, it doesn't matter who's on the right wing unless it's Ehlers because no one else is seemingly capable of getting Scheifele and Connor together in a way that works. It's just, and it's frustrating because I desperately want it to work. It'd be great if it did, but it doesn't. And no one seems willing to make the necessary change to divide that pairing and be, the adult in the room and make the decision. I don't know why it's so hard for this team to get away from that. And at some point, if they're just going to let this continue to be a problem, someone else on the team is going to have to play hero because it's not going to be the top line. So, my frustrations with this unit have really boiled over this year. And they've boiled over at other times in past years, but it's just, we're so close to the playoffs. We're so close to, what could be a pivotal moment in this franchise. And it feels like Winnipeg's not ready to meet the moment. So tough stuff, man. Tough stuff. But I want to talk about the power play in particular because it's been a sore spot for the entire year. And we'll talk about some improvements that we've seen, but also where it continues to be deficient because the stuff that it does poorly is going to be a problem in the postseason too. The Jets may not get as many power plays in the playoffs, but at the end of the day, they've still got to have some level of a man advantage that gives the Jets an edge because, the even strength scoring, if it continues to be dry like it is as it is right now, you know what? You're going to have to lean on that 5v4 advantage, and it's actually more of a hindrance right now than it is a help to the Jets. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. But before we go too much further, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your vehicle alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. No matter what you're into, whether it's speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has your back. With over 122 million parts for your number one vehicle, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home the victory. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on these closing thoughts on tonight's episode. As I know I said I wasn't going to rant, but I felt like I just did for about 20 minutes anyways. Sorry about that. I try to be generally balanced and positive, but I think the frustrations of the last few months are starting to settle in. And I think with the season winding down, it's just there's no margin for error. And I think, the more that we begin to realize that these next two seasons, including this one, or these two seasons, including this year, are really the two shots that the Jets have, any wasted shot just feels like a devastating blow for this core and for the fan base. We're finally getting sellouts again. The vibes, we're finally starting to get, back into good spirits. And here we are staring down, not necessarily rock bottom, but a poor performance nonetheless, when this should be a time that we're getting excited about the playoffs, feeling the hype. And instead, I think all we feel is anxiety because the team has continued to underperform. And the power play has been one of the biggest boogeymen for this team the whole year. It's been a problem before in other seasons. It's just, it's almost unwatchable. Every time the Jets have a power play, honestly, I wish you could just decline it because it's actually worse for the Jets to go on the power play than it is to keep rolling at even strength. If the Jets just played at 5v5, maybe half of their problems would go away. I have no idea. Every time the Jets have a power play, it just kills any sort of momentum they gain, and they look kind of just dead in the water. And I think one of the biggest problems with the power play is that, you have some level of puck movement and passing and occasional skater rotation, but generally speaking, a lot of guys stick to the same areas, and it often happens at such a slow rate to where PK diamonds and goalies tend to adjust pretty well. The only time that it ever really changed was when Velarde was back below the goal line, because he started to change the dynamic of how their puck movement worked, especially with the triangle between him, Monahan, and Scheifele on that right side, that were I guess when he's facing, out towards the slot area, it's his right. That space was an area where he really controlled and dialed up the offense. When he's also net front, he's a great backdoor tap-in merchant, and that presence has been sorely missed. But that whole goal line thing, I think that's where he really excels. And the Jets haven't found a way to replace it yet. They haven't been able to replicate it at all without him. And, you have the typical back end of Scheifele to, either Morrissey or Pionk to Connor. And that trio is just so slow. It's so predictable. And I feel like it actually takes away from the stuff that Scheifele does best. When Mark is towards the central space area, that's where he really makes his bread and butter. There's just almost no one on this team who is as dangerous as Scheifele is when he's attacking the slot area. It almost feels like he's completely wasted on the half wall, which is crazy to say because on paper, you look at his passing and his skill, and you would think he'd actually work out pretty well there. But it feels like, with how static the power play tends to be and the mediocre shooting chances they create, it ends up being a huge detriment to have Scheifele just passing, because the shot that he has is lethal. His release is crazy good, and he has a wonderful sense of space and timing that really comes alive when he's down the middle, especially towards the crease. The lower in the slot he is, the more dangerous and more deadly and lethal that release becomes. And I feel like it's just wild that the Jets haven't really gone back to that. When he was actually doing that a bit in this game, I thought the power play looked a lot more dynamic. You had Toffoli on the left half wall, and because of that, it actually looked like he received passes a little cleaner. You had Scheifele sort of occupying up high, that upper slot area that he would occasionally drill down towards the center and lower space in, and then you had Monahan behind the net at times. It just looked a lot more dynamic and unpredictable, and that's where the power play could really use a bit of a boost. And I feel like not having Ehlers on that first unit is a big mistake. Nick really should be up there. I think he's one of your most creative attackers and passers on the team. And sure, he'll make some riskier passes from time to time, but at the same time, you're talking about a guy who's one of the few players who can make Scheifele score loads of goals. Ehlers will tee up just about the best passes of anyone on this team. And I'll tell you what, Mark is so good at punishing those pucks, man. He will rip those shots home. So why not put Ehlers up there again and see if you can spark that top power play unit? Every time you look at the second power play unit, they're a lot more direct. They seemingly create more shots on goal, and some of the tips and deflections and chances that they create down low have been extremely dangerous. So maybe there's something for the top unit to learn from the second unit, especially when it comes to how to create offense and chaos down low. I think if you create more uncertainty in PK units and you actually add that level of unpredictability and explosiveness, it sows a lot of doubt in their minds. It forces them to hesitate, and that hesitation can be all that you need in order to finally score. To me, it really shouldn't be that crazy for the coaching staff to make these adjustments and try and at least get something out of this power play. It is at the end of the day what they're being paid to do, and it just feels like they found 1,000 ways not to make the power play work. So, if they can't get this stuff right, then they probably shouldn't be managing it for the Jets. Maybe they could figure it out somewhere else. But you did hear in the past that Lauer, as much as it sucks to say, he was fired by the Ducks after Anaheim's power play was one of the worst in the league. That was something I didn't realize until he came to the Jets, and I only found out about that within the past month or two, and it starts to explain a lot about why the Jets power play has been as poor as it is. But Bones also has input there, and I really hope that at some point he makes some adjustments, because it can't keep going like this forever. And with only 9 games left, I'm doubtful that they'll fix it. But, all we can hope is that when Velarde comes back, he provides the necessary jump and boost to that play down low to make the power play look functional again. But relying on one player to make your team look a lot more competent than it is not how you want to be rolling into the playoffs. That's just not the best way to do it. I think it sets you up for failure. And it's a concern that I have for the Jets that, increasingly that whole fraud word that we all hate is looking a little too on point for how the Jets have been recently. But like I said, I ain't going to call this team a fraud. I hate that word, and I think it sort of undermines a lot of what the Jets have done well this year. And I think it's important to focus on that because, like I said, there's a good foundation for the Jets to build on here, but the 2 to 3 things that they do really poorly are enough to overturn the cart. And I think that's where Winnipeg desperately needs some new ideas, some new changes, and some stuff to get this team back on the road. But let me know how you're feeling about all of this. Do you share my sentiments? Are you a little more optimistic? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. We'll see you here tomorrow with some preview coverage ahead of Winnipeg versus Ottawa. But like I said, all the time that we have. Thanks so much. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets, go.